questions. Questions orales. Honorable Chef de l'Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister was once again doing push-ups for the cameras yesterday, his Finance Minister was doing some of his own verbal gymnastics back here. He was trying to explain how a healthy Conservative surplus turned into a Liberal deficit. It turns out that we are just stuck on this whole balanced budget thing. And he's right, Mr. Speaker, and we're proud of it. My question to the Prime Minister is simple. Is he actually ever planning to balance the budget?
Prime Minister.
I thank the member opposite for bringing up an opportunity for me to talk about the Invictus Games and the extraordinary work this government is doing to support veterans, to ensure that there is an opportunity for all Canadians to cheer on the extraordinary valor, courage and strength of Canadian veterans. But obviously, on the issue of economic growth, we made it very clear during the election campaign that we're going to be investing in communities, we're going to be putting more money in the pockets of the middle class and those working hard to join it, because fiscal responsibility and indeed balanced budgets are important.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've all heard of March Madness. Here's what the Liberals did in March by their own budget numbers. They took the $7.5 billion surplus we left them, spent every dime of it, and then spent another $5 billion on top of that in 1 month. It's reckless, it's irresponsible, and every Canadian is going to have to pay it back. Does the Prime Minister understand that it's actually not his money to spend? It belongs to hard-working Canadians.
Prime Minister.
Is it reckless and irresponsible to be lowering taxes for the middle class while raising them on the wealthiest 1%? Is it reckless and irresponsible to be giving a Canada Child benefit that's more generous to 9 out of 10 Canadian families by doing more for the families who need it and less for the families who don't? What frankly would have been reckless and irresponsible were for Canadians to decide to keep them in government for 1 more minute after October 19th.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Right. Let's just skip to the push-ups. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's actually the job of the Prime Minister to at least try and keep spending under control. And the facts are clear. The Parliamentary Budget Officer and the Finance Department agree. Conservatives left this government a healthy surplus, and the Liberals have blown it. Does the Prime Minister understand that this billions of spending actually has to be paid back?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm pleased that the member opposite now has discovered what apparently she thinks the job of the Prime Minister is, because the previous Prime Minister added $160 billion to Canada's debt with very little to show for it. Indeed, for 10 years we had lower economic growth than Canadians needed to have. We had underinvestment in our infrastructure, in our communities, in public transit. That is why this government is committed to making the investments in our communities that Canadians so desperately need, that businesses so desperately need, and putting more money into the pockets of the middle class and those working hard to join it. That's the job of the...
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, over the last few years, the previous Prime Minister had to face the worst economic crisis since the Second World War, and happily it wasn't this Prime Minister who had to manage that crisis. We had difficult moments, and we left our fiscal house in order with a surplus at the end of February, $7.5 billion. Yesterday, the Finance Minister waxed lyrical, and he said clearly the members on the other side are still stuck on this whole balanced budget thing. Mr. Speaker, families are filling in their tax returns. They have to balance their own home budgets. Can the Prime what's happening across the country and what we've understood is that we need to make investments in infrastructure that haven't been made for 10 years. That's why we invested these billions of dollars in public transit in Montreal and elsewhere, and that's why we're applauding the potential investments in light rail in Montreal that will help people to get around. Investments in Edmonton, in Toronto, across the country, in things that the previous government had refused to invest in our communities. Time has come to give options and help economic growth for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the projects he's talking about are ones that we set up, Mr. Speaker. In the Montreal region, we were working with respecting Quebec areas of jurisdiction, and we delivered the most significant infrastructure plan in the country while balancing the budget. Why is this Prime Minister obliged to put us into deficit to achieve what we did without doing so? The Honourable Prime Minister. The Conservatives threw the balanced budget out the window. We are making investments because it's necessary. Over 10 years with them, none were made, not in public transit, not in mitigating problems related to climate change. Canadians elected a government that is ready to invest in our future and put money into the middle class, put money in their pockets, money for families, and things that will create this growth that has been lacking for 10 years for Canadians because of the previous government. The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Trêve de plaisanterie sur l'ensemble.
Well, that's enough of the jokes about the previous government. Let's talk about the current government. And the issue of diet-filtered milk, it's the inaction of the current Liberal government that's really hurting our dairy producers across the country. They can no longer borrow money. They're losing hundreds of millions. Over the last 6 months, the Liberals have done nothing. Are they going to implement the NDP's motion, yes or no, and stand up to support our dairy farmers? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are continuing to support the Canadian dairy sector. We speak regularly with them to understand the issues and ensure that in terms of the free trade agreement with Europe, we will provide the necessary compensation. We are working at every stage to protect their industry because we are committed to protecting supply management, and we will continue to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Outremont. Mr. Speaker, continuing to just talk will do nothing about our family dairy farms. They need action. And this action is quite simply that the Liberal government is responsible here. They just have to enforce the rules. Why this lack of action? It's inexplicable. But let's talk about another issue. At the Parliamentary Committee today, KPMG, those who put up this fiscal scheme be held responsible for their actions. Will the Liberals, yes or no, support our motion? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, like all Canadians, we're very concerned by the allegations that there has been favoritism at the Canada Revenue Agency, and that's why we are working attentively with the Minister and with her department to ensure that all Canadians and all companies pay their share of taxes, and we will ensure that this be done now and in the future. The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Speaking of parliamentary procedure, you see, in committee today, the Liberals had a chance to vote with us to require KPMG to give the names. And you know what they did? They used parliamentary procedure to avoid that, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about the Liberals avoiding their responsibility in another key area, which is climate change. They signed Kyoto the last time that they were in power and went on to have one of the worst records in the world. This time they went to Paris and said Canada's back. Unfortunately, Canada was back with the Conservative plan. Why no plan to reduce greenhouse gases in Canada? Canadians want to know.
Prime Minister.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, I actually wasn't a politician when Kyoto was signed, but the member opposite was Minister of Environment for the province of Quebec, and Wales a part of responsibility on what wasn't done in the past. What is being done right now, however, is that we are working with the provinces. We have demonstrated a commitment internationally and here at home to engage on climate change, to ensure that we are actually living up to the responsibilities of future generations. Look at us, to look at the challenges but also the opportunities coming in investing in green technology and the real future Canadian jobs.
The honourable member for Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week the Minister of Finance, when asked about the surplus noted in the Fiscal Monitor, said that he didn't want to focus on the issue. Yesterday in the House of Commons during question period, the Minister actually laughed off the concept of restraint by lamenting that the Conservatives are stuck in this whole balanced budget thing. Recently, the National Post noted that this may be the first surplus a finance minister doesn't want to talk about. So my question for the Minister of Finance is this: what's so scary about being fiscally responsible?
Well said. Well.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, our priority is on investing to grow the economy. Just 6 months ago, Canadians chose hope over fear. They chose optimism over pessimism. They chose to make investments to grow the economy instead of balancing the budget on the backs of Canadian families. Mr. Speaker, while the members on the opposite side want to tell Canadians that they made the wrong choice, we're moving forward with the right choices, the choices to invest in our economy that are going to make the future better for Canadians today and tomorrow.
For Milton.
The Finance Minister also said yesterday that he was convinced that the Liberal Party was doing the right thing because it's making his children and his grandchildren better off. Now, I'm happy for them, but I also worry about the other kids that we have in this country as well who may not be able to afford the high cost of the minister's borrowing. Minister maybe has just said that he's comfortable with the choices made that he's making, but reality, Mr. Speaker, he's going to be spending on the backs of our children. What part of saddling our kids with billions and billions of dollars of debt is making them better off?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the members opposite would like to focus on our low-growth past. We want to focus on what we're actually doing for Canadian children today. We've moved forward with the Canada Child Benefit, which will help 9 out of 10 families with children, and it'll help them a lot, on average $2,300 per year. We're moving forward to help Indigenous people. We're moving forward on educational initiatives, $3.5 billion over 5 years, to improve the situation for Indigenous people, Indigenous children in our country. We have a progressive government that's going to make a real difference for the children of today so they can be better off tomorrow.
For Brantford Grant.
Mr. Speaker, the long list of Liberal promises now includes transparency, thanks to this finance minister. The PBO delivered a scathing indictment of this government for its lack of budget transparency. The minister refuses to acknowledge that we handed them a surplus. We know the Liberals jammed as much new spending in last year's budget and books as they could. Is the minister, if he truly wants to be transparent, will he tell Canadians how much the March Madness spending spree has cost them?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is entitled to his opinion. I've had the opportunity to crisscross this country and listen to Canadians' opinions. They appear to understand quite well what we did with our budget, and they are very positive about the initiatives that are helping Canadians today and tomorrow. I also went international. I heard the Financial Times call us a glimmer of hope. I heard the Wall Street Journal say that we're doing the right things on the IMF plan to grow the economy. Mr. Speaker, we are going to make a real difference for Canadians today and tomorrow with the kind of fiscal measures that will grow our economy for the long run.
Member for Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we know the Liberals love to talk about facts. So
let's look at some facts. Their decision to abandon tax cuts for small businesses will cost the industry $2.2 billion over the next 4 years.
Shocking.
And I repeat, $2.2 billion. The more we learn about the Liberals' so-called commitment for small businesses, the more we realize there is no commitment at all. When will the Liberals deliver their promised 9% tax cuts?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary for Small Business and Tourism.
To thank my honourable colleague for the question, because we know that the small business tax rate is there to help companies grow and create jobs. But we need to make sure that the small business tax system is fair and being used appropriately. A loophole is allowing far too many people to use this rate to get out of paying the personal income taxes the rest of us pay each and every year. This loophole is costing taxpayers over $500 million a year. We need to fix the problem, Mr. Speaker, so those using the small business tax rate are the small business owners who are creating jobs for our communities.
Honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Finance made a quite surprising statement, and I quote, "Clearly the members from the other side are still stuck in this whole balanced budget thing." Mr. Speaker, I can assure the House that yes, we are, and we will always be obsessed with balanced budgets. The strange thing is that this finance minister is obsessed with deficits. So can he recognize that this is a mistake on Canada regarding Canada's future? Mr. Speaker, our priority is to make investments. 6 months ago, Canadians chose optimism over pessimism. Canadians chose to make investments to grow the economy, not to have a balanced budget at all costs. And so we are making choices that are good for Canadians choices that will grow the economy now and in the future. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the government's approach is irresponsible. It's clear that the Minister of Finance has completely lost control of spending. This is irresponsible now, and particularly for our children and grandchildren who will have to pay for the mistakes being made now. When will the government get back to reality and stop putting this on our children's backs? The Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak about children in Canada. With our new measures, they will be in a much better position now and in the future. We introduced the Canada Child Benefit that will help nine families out of 10 with $2,300 more per year. The future will be brighter for these children because we will make investments now on their behalf.
Mr. Speaker, today the Auditor General reported that Canada is treating our Army reservists like second-class soldiers. They're underfunded, under-equipped, and undertrained. In fact, our reservists were sent into combat without first receiving the proper international mission training. This is all unacceptable. Will the minister today commit to give reservists the training they need, the support they're entitled to, and the respect they deserve?
Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I commend the honourable member for his concern. I actually was one of those reservists on those deployments who received the training, and I can assure you I'm accepting all the Attorney General's recommendations. And I'd also like to say that the Canadian Armed Forces has already started working on improving the training aspect for domestic and international operations, and including the recruiting and retention for our reserve force to play a critical role for domestic and international operations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Valois-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, today the Auditor General showed that the government had not implemented adequate measures to help our veterans who are suffering from PTSD. The department's not managing its drug program well and taking into effect the veterans into account. The Liberals cannot blame the Conservatives. Their budget did not include 1 cent for mental health of veterans. When will the Liberals support our veterans and invest in their mental health?
Veterans Affairs.
Well, I thank the member for his question, and we accept all the Auditor General's recommendations, and we are working forward to them through our programs throughout that we deliver. I can tell you that my mandate letter says to get working on our suicide prevention as well as our PTSD and mental health centers. That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to deliver this care in a forthright and profound manner that makes veterans' lives and their families' lives better.
The member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of International Trade claims that her vanity trip to California was to promote Canadian business interests. However, emails released through Access to Information paint a very different picture. Her staff were scrambling to put a program together, and they were begging the LA Times journalists for an interview. Senior Foreign Policy and Diplomacy Officer Dan Pasquini stated in an email that this visit has only just fallen in our laps. Why does this minister continue to claim this trip was about Canadian business interests when it was actually all about her?
Good question. Of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Conservatives are trying to create a story where there is none. It's my job to promote Canada in the United States. In fact, just yesterday, I was pleased to be in Washington for a trilateral trade meeting with my American and Mexican counterparts. It was my 6th visit to the United States in 6 months. And what I'm hearing in the U.S. is that after a lost decade, Canada is finally back at the table. I'm going to keep going back and doing what the Conservatives failed to do: support trade, jobs, and our middle class.
The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in a one-on-one sit-down interview with the LA Times, the minister's California dream trip was characterized as a brief stopover. LA Consul General Villeneuve noted there seems to be a bit of confusion. The Global Affairs Director of General Communications was also confused, saying in emails, "What's she doing in LA besides the Bill Maher show?" Clearly, this is a personal trip built around her TV appearance. Well, we know the Liberals are entitled to their entitlements, but aren't taxpayers entitled to an honest answer about the real purpose for her going to LA?
Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to try to create a story where there is none. The media appearances were part of the official visit, along with 6 business roundtables. It's my job to promote Canada to the world. But since the members opposite are so interested in this topic, let me remind them that their own leader, the former Prime Minister, spent $50,000 of taxpayers' money to get himself U.S. media appearances. We don't need to do that. We get invited.
Elgin, Middlesex, London. The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Ready? Ready?
Go for it. Don't listen.
Carry on. Go ahead, Steve. Come on.
Thank you. Let's listen to the honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
The story is that the Minister of International Trade needs to be honest with Canadians. She declares proudly that she was in California to promote Canadian business, but her own officials didn't even know about the trip until 2 days before. The minister indicates that she met with the Lieutenant Governor of California and a U.S. Senator, but doesn't mention that was on the Late Show with Bill Maher. Wow. When will this minister just be honest and tell Canadians she went to Hollywood on the personal vanity trip using taxpayers' money?
Of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, we know it's our government's job to promote Canada to the world. And you know what? When I travel to promote Canada, I am proud to speak to the international media. Just yesterday, I gave an interview to Politico in Washington. And as minister, I'd like to list some of the other international interviews I've done. I've done an interview with MSNBC, with the Wall Street Journal, with the Washington Post, with the LA Times, with the Financial Times. I've done 3 BBC interviews. I've spoken to EU Trade Insights. I spoke to La Libre, Deutsche Welle, the German TV, Bloomberg Television, Handelsblatt, Süddeutsche Deutsche, Zeitung, the Frankfurt Allgemeine.
For Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear clear that the minister's staff had to scramble at the last minute to find things to do in California to justify doing a late show on HBO. When the minister's own staff is informed that she'll be in LA just 2 days prior to her arrival, how are Canadians to believe it was on government business? The Minister of International Trade used taxpayers' money to further her personal interests, not the interests of Canadian business. When will this minister pay back the money on this ban?
International trade.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to try to create a story where there isn't one, but I'd now like to share with this House some details of the business meetings I had when I was in California. Here are some of the people I met with. Jim Haney, Senior VP and General Manager of City National Bank, recently acquired by RBC. Greg Foster, the CEO of IMAX. Creative BC and Trade and Invest BC, who were there. John Chang, the Treasurer of the State of California. Jeff Gorel, the Deputy Mayor. Other meetings I had there included a reception with the Friends of British Columbia, a meeting with Los Angeles economic leaders.
The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, at the heart of our public health care system is one simple principle. No one should have to pay out of pocket for health care. That's right. Yet, patients all across the country are being charged extra fees for medical services, and the Government of Canada is doing nothing about it. Some Canadians have become so frustrated with Liberal inaction, they filed a lawsuit today against the federal government. Why won't the minister do her job, enforce the Canada Health Act, and act immediately to put a stop to user fees?
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, it is my great pleasure to uphold, along with our government, the Canada Health Act. This government is taking federal leadership on health care. We uphold the Canada Health Act, which underscores a number of principles, including accessibility, which ensures that Canadians will always have access to the care that they need based on that need and not based on the ability to pay. I will work with the provinces and territories to be sure that that access is always available to Canadians.
Honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. The billing of extra fees in health care is a problem that has been going on in Quebec for years, and this federal government is doing nothing to put an end to it. Now, a broad coalition of groups, including FEDOC, the Quebec Medical Association, and the FIQ, are filing a lawsuit against the Government of Canada to force it to apply the Canada Health Act. Will the minister play her role and enforce this act in order to put an end to these extra user fees? The Honourable Minister of Health.